So please give Colin a warm welcome in the chat, um, and give him a virtual pat on the back for setting aside time today. Okay, I've stopped my share of the screen, so I've allowed you. Colin should be sharing now. There we go. Fantastic. So I wanted to first ask Colin about some of his earliest memories with Acorn computers, and getting his very first Acorn Electron. So when was that, Colin? And what memories do you have from that time?
So yeah, in the photo here, you can see it's my dad, my mum, and me. It's actually taken in my grandparents' back garden. I do have a brother, but he is not in the photo because he hadn't been born yet. So there's a bit of an age gap between us. But my dad, he was the IT teacher at the school that he taught at, and where I also went to. And he started out as a maths teacher, but as happens in the 80s to a lot of maths teachers, he was given a computer by the headmaster and said, "I'm sure you'll know what to do with this." And he had to quickly find out. So through a combination of various computer shows that he went to, and obviously he was given a BBC Micro to take home as well to have at home, and that's the Beeb that I can remember. As I was saying, as long ago as I can remember, as long back as my memory will go into childhood, there was some form of Acorn computer at home. But the Electron was actually my first computer, and it was either a birthday present for my fifth birthday in February '88, or possibly it was a Christmas '87 gift. I can't quite remember. Obviously, by that stage, the Electron was not a contemporary machine. I mean, it had obviously been out for quite a few years by then, and it wasn't a new machine. But for me, it was my first computer. I didn't have a plus one, so that photo there is actually my current Acorn Electron that I got semi recently. So I didn't have a plus one, but I did have a tape drive. You can see in the photo. I mean, again, that's not the tape drive I had. Unfortunately, I don't have any of my original equipment from back then. But yeah, I had an Electron. I had Snapper on cassette, which takes somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes to load, and I was super happy with that. I mean, I played Snapper to death. I mean, let's face it, if it took 20 minutes to load up, you were going to get the most out of it that you could, right? Because it takes a long time to load these games back then. And yeah, the Electron for me was it was something quite magical. And I mean, looking back on it, I do also realize I was extremely fortunate to have access to a computer that was mine. I mean, a lot of people may have had computers at home that, belonged to the family. It was the family machine, and you might be lucky enough to get some time on it. But to actually have my own one, I consider myself very fortunate to have had that because it lived in my bedroom, and I spent a lot of time on it. The Electron probably lasted me a good couple of years, and then my dad, I think he ended up with a master at home, and so then his BBC Model B became mine. And sorry to the Electron fans, I mean I love the Electron, don't get me wrong, but when I got my hands on the Beeb, I was like, wow, yeah, okay, this is considerably better. Even the games that I'd played, obviously on the Electron, the versions on the Beeb were by and large quite a lot better. A lot of them played a lot better, had better graphics, or at least better screen size, and didn't have all that junk at the top and the bottom of the screen that you sometimes get with Electron games. Um, and so yeah, that from then on, I mean, I actually had the BBC Model B then right through into the early '90s. I know that by that stage it was a pretty old hat, but it wasn't for me. And for me, that's what a computer was. So we didn't have things like IBM PC compatibles at home until, yeah, I would say probably about 93, 94. So for the first 10, 11 years of my life, it was Acorn computers at home. And I suppose that's why they're such a special thing to me, because they really resonate with that period of childhood. And even using a BBC Micro now, like it just kind of gives a really nostalgic feel. And
I mean,
yeah,
it's incredible. I think all of us could probably share a similar memory where you open this gift on Christmas Day or your birthday, and it's the first toy or present that you've had that you can do 10,000 things with. All your previous toys, you could just do one thing with, or maybe three things with. But you, with a computer, you could do 10,000 things with, and your imagination was the limit, really, was the limitation. So yeah, that is the magical thing. And was Snapper the earliest game you remember?
So it's the earliest game that I remember as a game that I would actually like load up myself. It kind of shares sort of top spot with Imogen because I didn't have that on the Electron, but my dad had it on his Beeb, and so he used to let me play Imogen on his Beeb, which obviously once I then got that Beeb, that became and has remained, I guess, my favorite BBC Micro game. I love Imogen. I've completed it I don't know how many times, and I don't. It doesn't get old for me. I mean, even though I know how to solve all the levels, I just love it. I think it's such a clever idea, and even up to today. I mean, I'm not a huge modern gamer. I don't play a lot of modern games, but I've not really ever seen anything quite like it since. It's just a very unusual and very clever game.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move to the next slide.
Sure. There we go.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
was going to ask you about early programming and early programming projects.
Yeah, so I think, part of the reason why my parents were happy for me to have a computer at home rather than, say, something like a console is that it wasn't just for playing games. I mean, I obviously played a lot of games on it, but it was there as something more than that. And I know, for some people, the programming side of things wasn't something they took an interest in. A computer was for playing games. But I have to say that for me, it started from so dad had a subscription to Micro User, and he used to give me the magazine when he was done with it. And I was really fascinated by the typing listings, which is what they were, it was just incredible that you had several pages of text. And if you were patient enough and sat there and typed it all in, you got a not very good game at the end of it, but it was still quite impressive that you got something from, I mean, literally just text on a page, right? And I really liked that, and that obviously stimulated in me a kind of interest in like how did that actually work, like what was actually going on here. And in 1990, I think it would have been, it was probably on the front cover of, yeah, 1990, that was it. This magazine, Let's Compute, came out. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but it was actually aimed at younger users. It was a little bit behind the times by this point because obviously by 1990, I don't think there were quite that many people with BBC Micros and Electrons at home. It does say Archimedes on the front, but the magazine was very, very much geared towards 8 bits. But I loved this magazine. I mean, it only lasted a year. So I think that I've got the first issue and the last issue there on the screen. I have got all of them on my bookshelf now. But yeah, I had a subscription to it. It was called the Let's Compute Club, and you got badges and a ruler and a few other bits and pieces, I think a mug possibly. Um, and I thought it was great. I mean, I have to say, bearing in mind I wasn't that old at this point, logo was the thing that appealed most to me because it was very easy to use. The actual programming of logo is very simple. You don't have to know many commands, but you could draw pictures on a screen with it, and that really appealed. And at our school, we had one of those big turtles that you could put on the floor with a big piece of paper, and if you ran your logo program on that, it literally drew it out on the paper, which obviously was very very interesting to me. But yeah, through Let's Compute, I also then started to understand a bit more about BBC Basic, and yeah, that's probably my kind of go-to programming language. I mean, I work in IT now, but I still love BBC Basic as a language. I mean, I know it's kind of simplistic compared to what you can do with modern programming languages, but again, I guess like the machines themselves, I just love it. I find it very comfortable programming in BBC Basic.
Absolutely. And the other thing I like about these kind of publications, these kind of magazines, was the illustrations help stir your imagination and kind of incentivized you to type it all in.
Yeah.
And you knew you weren't going to get a similar graphical picture to what you were seeing on the page, but it just kind of got your imagination going and incentivized you to put the program in to see what would happen. And I like that of how it would kind of force you to use your imagination
Yeah.
to lead on from these pictures to see what was possible with this code, and perhaps you could make it better or adapt it, do something with it. And it would just stir you. And especially for young people, I think that's a fantastic kind of publication. It's the first time I've seen that, so that was
Hmm.
really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, as I say, unfortunately, it would have been it would have been better for the magazine if it had come out maybe a little bit earlier in of the 80s. But
Yeah.
so yeah, it was it only lasted a year. But I mean, for me, it was exactly the right time. Like it was targeted at people like me, and it was exactly I was the audience for this magazine, and I was of the age that it was aimed at. So yeah, it was perfect as far as I was concerned.
So how about things like clubs or friends as you were growing up? Did that help support what you were doing as well?
So yeah, I mean, friend singular in particular. So this is my friend Simon, who I've known since primary school. So that photo of us, I think we were about possibly 5 or 6 years old there at the beach down near Hastings. I was his best man at his wedding. That's the other photo there. That's not us getting married to each other. It was his wedding, but I was his best man. And yeah, I'm still friends with him to this day. He is much the superior programmer, so he's also like me. We've been working in IT since since graduation, but he also went to uni and studied it, unlike me. Um, and yeah, he's a great guy. And it was just a coincidence that he was my best friend at school, and he had a BBC Micro, which again, I don't think I appreciated at the time how unusual that was because even even notwithstanding the fact that the Beeb was not in its heyday at that point, most people would have had a Spectrum, I think, or possibly a C64. But yeah, having a Beeb at home, I don't know, I don't really know why he had one. I suspect it was possibly his dad's, but yeah, he had one. He had loads of games for it, and he was extremely generous at lending them to me and letting me copy them on Dad's twin disk drive. And the other thing makes me smile when I look back on it is that in our school, we still had BBC Micros in primary school. There were still a few Beebs dotted around, and there was one in our primary school classroom, our form room, and well, he and I were the only people that had Beebs at home and therefore had games. So we used to bring them into school, and the other kids in the class thought that was great because I mean none of them had Beebs, so they didn't have any games for this machine. But we used to bring them in, and then obviously at wet play time we'd play them. And I remember Simon made a compilation disc. It had like I don't know 20 games or so on it, which he just kind of copied onto this disc. And when we when we moved up from primary school into secondary school, he very solemnly handed this disc over to a kid in the year below and was like, "You're now to be trusted with this. You know, you are the owner of this games disc." Because it was by that point that was the only games disc left that could then be used by other kids. So yeah, it's quite funny. But yeah, he had a Beeb. He as I said before, he was much better at programming than me, and he's kind of gone all the way through it, like the kind of full development of IT over the years. He was one of those people that had Linux at home, like in like the early 90s. So he was like into actually running things himself on the command line. And I must admit, my interest in IT continued, but I was much more interested in things like HTML and PHP by that point, whereas he was like very I mean, he could do that stuff without thinking, but he was very much into the other programming languages, things like C, and then when he went on to university, he studied that, and he then went on to become a very successful IT guy, and he's done all sorts of different roles, but he's now he's running his own department now.
I think computer science teachers back in the day were quite generous, really, with kids coming in with their own tapes and discs and saying, "Can I play this?" I think I remember my computer science teacher being quite generous to everybody because not everyone had a computer, and so I think they were quite good with their time and with their because it was an adventure for them as well. I think nowadays it's probably a little bit more um, frameworked and a bit stricter in classrooms. Sorry, you can't put that USB stick in because it's probably got 10 viruses on.
Yeah.
Um, but I think back in the day, I think that, I think we saw some generosity and flexibility with the teaching staff for sure. So this did influence your career path.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
In quite a surprising way, really, because at school, I mean, I had this interest in computers, which was very much, directly linked to my Acorn computing from a very early age. But I wasn't a STEM student at all. By the time I got to A level, I dropped all vestige of science, maths, anything like that. I did English, history, politics, and RS. And then I went to university and did philosophy, which it turns out is not the greatest degree choice when it comes to finding a job, unless you want to teach philosophy. Which, to be fair, I did consider that, but in the end, I thought, no, I probably don't want to stay at university for the rest of my life. So I went out looking for a job, and I had, let me think, from graduation through until, so I graduated in June of that year through until December. I basically went through a series of very dispiriting and sometimes embarrassing interviews for jobs that I didn't really know an awful lot about, certainly wasn't qualified for. And it got to the point where I was starting to worry that I wouldn't get a job. And I ended up in an interview at a startup in Croydon. It was a little tech startup. I hadn't been around for that long. And yeah, their main business was setting up AIX servers and installing things like Oracle on them and then handing them over to customers to then use. And they had a small managed service function and what was called a business intelligence team that basically did stuff with Oracle. And I got an interview with them, and they said, "Well, on paper, you don't really have what we're looking for." And I said, no, it's true. I said, but I love computers. And they were like, oh, okay, well, tell us a bit more about that. So I told them about the fact that I taught myself things like BASIC when I was a kid. And, I'd written my own websites and I'd had a summer job creating websites for a recruitment agency. And they were like, okay, well, you sound like you can, find your way around a computer. So they said, we'll take you on for a month and you need to pass the Oracle Certified Professional exam. Um, and if you can do that, we'll keep you. And bearing
Wow.
in mind, I didn't even know what Oracle was at this point. I certainly hadn't touched anything like SQL before. And so, yeah, my first day at that job, they gave me a stack of books, the Oracle OCP textbooks. It was Oracle 9i for anyone who's interested. And yeah, I had to just learn it. And they didn't give me any training. They didn't send me on any training courses or anything like that. I think it was very much we'll give this guy a punt and see what happens. And anyway, I did manage to pass the exam after a month. And they kept me on. And so, yeah, that started me out in IT. And I hold it completely responsible to the fact that I had, yeah, computers around me from such an early age and loved computers. It was a hobby of mine, but I didn't expect that I would actually end up working with computers as a career. But I have ever since. So today I'm a data engineer. So I use a lot of Databricks and Python, not so much Oracle anymore. But yeah, it's been what I've basically done my entire career now. So for the last 20 years, it's been me and databases pretty much.
Well, it's a great journey and story to hear about, and probably other people in the room probably can resonate with that story. Just explaining to the interviewer their love of computers, the experience they've got in the background, and uh, people giving you a chance in that day and age.
Yeah.
But that was a wonderful time actually, because you could get away with very little. And there's, I think, showing enthusiasm and having a bit of knowledge got you a long way. It's different today, obviously, a lot more competitive. So, okay, let's talk about your retro kit list, because I was very surprised by how much you could pack away into this
Yeah.
into your office, because I don't
Yeah.
know how you do it actually.
So, okay, well, we'll start with the Acorn stuff. So, This started out so up until mid 2020. Despite having, obviously, still loved my Acorn computing. Oh, and by the way, I should have mentioned Simon is the guy who put me on to BBEM. So back in like 2004, I think he mentioned to me about this emulator that you could run BBC Micro software games, and you could use it like you used a Beeb. So he's responsible for that, and that kind of kept the interest alive for me through emulation. But it got to the dreaded COVID lockdown period, and I just felt like, what, I've been doing all of this on emulation for such a long time, and I should just get a bead. I don't need anything else. That's what I said. I said, I don't need anything else. I just need BBC Micro. I'll even plug it into our TV, when I want to use it. That'll be fine because our TV had a SCART socket. So I got it, and that very quickly turned into, well, I would quite also like to have an Electron. So then I got the Electron, and of course, then I wanted a tape drive to go with the Electron, just so I could recreate that experience of what it was like when I had the Electron. And obviously treated myself to have the plus one with it because, well, why not? I didn't have that back in the day, but the plus one, actually today, the plus one is pretty indispensable if you don't want to load stuff from tape, because obviously all these amazing cartridges that people produce, like Dave Hitchens and others, it just makes using the Electron so much easier. So I got that, and I did think, well, I've kind of that represents the Acorn computers I had. Dad did have a BBC Master. I would love a BBC Master. I do not have space for a BBC Master, so I thought, I just this is fine. This will do. Um, then I went to a retro event in 2023, and I got very enthusiastic about Scion portables. They're not machines that I actually had back in the day, but when I discovered that actually there was a Scion Acorn Pocketbook, which basically was a Scion with a different badge on it, and slightly different names for some of the software, I thought, oh, well, this is the Acorn connection. That's all I need to know. And so I've now got, well, you can see there, I've got a 3A, which is my favorite, a 5 Series 5, a Revo, and the Acorn Pocketbook. And yeah, that's it's a semi-recent interest, but I do love them. I think they're great machines, and they're also really fun to just carry around if you want to, do a little bit of programming on the go. I really like the OPL language because it reminds me of BASIC. So yeah, those are great fun. Then I thought, well, I am an Acorn person, but I'm aware of obviously the impact of Sinclair and the interest that people have in Sinclair machines. And I did have a slight connection to them because Dad had a Z88 back when they came out, which I think is strictly counts as a Sinclair product. I think it came out as a Cambridge something or other, but I mean, essentially, it was a company that had come out of the Sinclair brand. And funnily enough, it runs BBC Basic, Richard Russell's BBC Basic for the Z80 runs on the Z88, which I think is great because it's a Sinclair product, but it's running BBC Basic, which just goes to show that BBC Basic is the best Basic. So I got one of those because I thought, well, that goes nicely with my Scions as a portable device. And then when I was at the Cambridge Centre for Computing History a while ago, I sat down with one. They had a ZX81 set up, and I started sort of playing with it, and thought it's actually quite sweet in a way. I mean, it's not very powerful, and you can't really do an awful lot with it, but I just kind of like it, and it's so compact as well. So I thought, yeah, I can get one of those. So I've got one of those. Um, and then I went to the RISC OS show recently, and having never touched RISC OS before, I looked at all the stuff that people were doing with it and thought, oh, this is quite fun. So I then ended up getting the Pinebook Pro, which is not a retro machine, but it runs RISC OS and is a laptop running RISC OS, which is quite nice. And plus, I already had my Raspberry Pi, so I can run RISC OS on there because I've got the little SD card with RISC OS open on it. So I have that, and obviously then I had to have the keyboard to match it, which I quite like. It's a very nice clacky keyboard, that one. And I mean, the reality is as well, I am a teenager of my time insofar as these were the machines that I had in my teens through to sort of university age. So I've got the full set of PCs that allow me to run Windows 3.1 and DOS, and then obviously Windows 98 and Windows XP. Actually, the one on the right-hand side is not dual boot, it's triple boot. So it does Windows XP. It also does Windows 7. and it does Linux Mint for actually being useful. So that's my set of Windows PCs. So yeah, it does all fit in this room that I'm in, which is not a very big room. If I show you here, so this is what my typical setup would look like if I was making a video. I tend to have something running on the Beeb next to me. The Beeb is always on the desk. I never put that one away, but everything else has to timeshare. So I don't have anything else out permanently. And obviously, I also work in this room. So when I'm working from home, this is also the room I work from, which means I have to have space for my own work laptop. So yeah, it's a small room. My wife is extremely forgiving because we only live in a two-bedroom flat, and this is bedroom number two. So this is basically my room for all of this stuff, and that big cupboard behind me is where everything else lives. So when it's not out, it's in there.
I think that's inspiration for us all, really, because I think you must have organized it so well. And it looks, well, maybe it's just for the photos, but it does look neat and tidy.
Yeah, so this is very heavily curated, Paul. Normally it looks like that, which is the unfiltered view. I'm not very good at putting these things away once I get them out. So I get things out and use them, and then they sort of sit there, and then I realize it's Monday and I have to go back to work. So then I have to sort of shove everything to one side in order to find some space for the machine that I have to actually work with. But yeah, if I'm being really well behaved as I was when I took those photos, yes, it does all have a home. I do keep saying to Louise, I'm like, no, it does all have somewhere to live. And she says, yeah, but what happens when you get the next machine? Won't get another machine.
I promise. How did you start your YouTube channel? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, sorry. Just before
Oh, yeah,
before I do, I
books.
should also mention it's not just machines. I have a bit of a problem with old books as well. And yeah, I've got an awful lot of old books and old magazines, and actually, that's not all of them. So that's as many as I can put on the shelves that are in this room. There's more in the cupboard behind me, which I can't keep out. So yeah, that's another problem. I keep saying old books don't take up much space, but after you've bought as many as I have, they do start taking up quite a lot of space.
Got some really good classics in there. Um,
Yeah.
I imagine those people in the room will recognize, and they've got some of those themselves. Acorn user as well.
There are actually one or two books I've got that relate to modern programming as well, because I do actually have to do that for my job.
Mm, great,
Um,
great collection.
but yeah, sorry, you asked me how did the channel start? So back in I think about 2018, I started watching a channel by a guy called Nick Jenkin who makes video game reviews where he commentates as he's playing the game. But he tends to do ZX Spectrum and Commodore games. That's kind of his focus, and it's very heavily skewed towards the Spectrum. And I really liked his videos. I liked the way that he made them because they were very natural. You're just him playing a game for 10, 15 minutes, and kind of giving his opinion what he thought about it. And I messaged him one day and said, oh, I really like stuff you do. I said, but have you ever considered doing any of these videos for BBC Micro or Electron games? And he said, to be honest, I only really do these videos for the machines that I know. And he said, I never had any Acorn machine growing up, and it's not really an area that I know very much about, so I don't tend to cover that. So then I thought, well, I could give it a go and just see, how I get on with it. And by the way, at this point, did not have any ambition to create a YouTube channel. The reason why my channel is just called Colin Hoad is because it's just my YouTube account, right? It's just tied to my Google account that I had already, and I just put a few videos together about Imogen where I mean, kind of not mimicking Nick's style because he just opens a game, plays it for a few minutes, and says what he thinks. But with Imogen, because I knew it obviously so well, I thought, well, I'll just make each individual level as a video, talk through how to complete the level, and that'll kind of get it out of my system, and I'll feel like, yeah, I've made some videos about a BBC Micro game that I really like. So I made them, and then didn't really think too much about it. But I was quite surprised that I got not loads of views, but people did watch them, and I started getting a few comments from people as well. And one of the comments I got said, "Well, what are you going to do next?" Um, and I thought, well, I hadn't really thought about a next. So having been asked the question, I thought, well, I suppose I could make a few more. And
Just a few.
well, yeah, I thought, well, maybe I could, Imogen's a game I knew from childhood. So I thought, well, I'm going to sit down and see if I can remember all the games that I played, on the Beeb when I was a kid. And I wrote down as many as I could remember. And I was obviously assisted by the complete BBC Micro Games Archive site because that let me kind of search around and look through some of the genres. And because there were quite a few that I'd forgotten the names of, but could remember the game. Everyone's had that feeling. And anyway, the list came out at 85 games. That was as many as I could remember playing. So hence why I gave it the slightly odd name of top 85. I think most people would have found another 15 games and made it a top 100 series. I think that would have been the natural thing to do, but I'm a bit odd. And I guess I also wanted to keep it as authentic as possible in the sense that I only wanted to do it for games that I had played, when they were more or less contemporary games. So that's how that started, and that series it actually took me quite a few years to finish because I started to realize that making even simple videos, 10, 15 minute long videos, it actually takes quite a bit of time. Now the early entries, if you've watched any of this series, if you watch some of the early videos, you'll notice that they're not particularly well made in the sense that I am literally just firing up the game in the emulator and recording myself playing it and talking about it. So there's not really any editing going on besides just cutting it to a suitable length. But the more of them that I made, the more that I realized, particularly when the game started to become a bit more involved, just opening up a game and playing it and talking is not always the best way to get across, what it is that's so good about the game, which is kind of the point of the series, is to try and share the enthusiasm I have with these games. And so then that started me realizing, okay, yeah, I need to put a bit more effort into this, maybe improve some of my equipment because I was just doing it on a cheap laptop headset that I had. I didn't have any special software for it. And yeah, over time, I mean, I leave it to people listening to decide, but over time, I believe that the what you might call the production value, I guess, has gone up because I have put more time into making them. And yeah, particularly the last sort of, I guess, five entries of that top 85 series, I really did try to make them, a more engaging kind of video to watch, which I hope came across. But that's how the channel started. Um,
Now, recently you've done the advent of Beeb, which is a great idea on the run up to Christmas. And I think you probably thought it was a good idea to start with, and then you realized how much work it was.
yeah, I don't think I'd I mean, I'm kind of contradicting myself here because so a couple of years ago I did do an advent of Beeb just on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter anymore, so please don't go looking for me on there. But yeah, when I was on there, I did this advent of Beeb, but it was just literally I would find a photo of something interesting, like the front cover of the EcoNet user guide or something like that, and I would just post it, put a one sort of sentence description, and that was the door of the day kind of thing. And it was surprisingly popular actually. Quite a few people found it quite fun. And then last year, I thought I would do just some reviews of Christmas themed games. So I didn't do one every day. I think I did about four or five. Covered some of the Christmas themed games, and that was, enjoyable. And then Christmas came around quite quickly for me this year, and it was on the 30th of November. I thought, oh yeah, well, I should probably do something for Christmas because I have done it now for the last couple of years. And so I thought, oh, well, I know what I'll do. There's that Lucky Dip feature on the complete BBC Micro Games website. So I could just make one video for each day of Advent of just, clicking that button and playing what comes up. Um, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to do that. And I made the first five, I think, and quickly realized, oh gosh, this is taking a long time to do. I mean, they're not very long videos. They average about 5 minutes each. But, again, going back to the production value thing, I wanted to do a nice intro for each one. And I wanted to kind of give them all a kind of consistent look and feel. And so, yeah, I did the first five and it got to, I don't know, midnight on the 30th. And I thought, well, I'm either going to do this or I'm not. So I'm going to make myself do it So the following day, the 1st of December, I uploaded the first one and scheduled the next four because YouTube lets you do that. You can upload a video but not actually have it go live until a certain time. And I thought, well, I've done it now, so I've got to make the rest. And the next uh, the next few days were pretty busy because I was obviously still working during the day, and then in the evenings I was kind of frantically putting together the rest of the video so that I could make sure that the series did run all the way up to the 24th, which I think by the second week of December I'd managed to get all of them done, so they were all then ready to go on
So
at
being
6.
100% honest, you didn't re-roll the dice for the lucky dip. If you had a game that was picked, you stuck with the game.
That is correct. The only thing that I did was if I rolled the dice and it said this game is lost, I thought, well, that doesn't really make for a very
Mm.
interesting video. So that's the only time where I would re-roll the dice. But everything else is what you see is
Yeah.
what you get, and that's why some of them are a bit naff because I didn't curate it. I didn't play it and think, will this be a good video? I thought, well, that's what's come up, so that's what the video is going to be
Yeah.
about. Um, yeah.
And it's good because, I mean, there's a whole series of games in that list that I've never seen, never seen before, and probably other people in the room as well. It's like, oh, that's new. Yeah, it's probably been a bit of education for everyone game wise from the list there.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I would say out of the 24, there were at least two that I think were genuinely good games and I'd never heard of. So
Mm,
they were a surprise and they were good games. The
yeah.
other 22 were hit and miss, but yeah, there were definitely two there that I thought were very good.
Um, you've also done your own interviews in the past as well, haven't you? So you can tell us about those perhaps.
Yeah, I should say at this point, first of all, a big thanks to I think Dave Arcadian is he's on. I think he might be listening only, but a big thank you to him and also to iDesign, who are the people behind the Acorn World in Pixels book. So that's where these interviews kind of came from. In the process of that book being obviously put together, a lot of contacts were made with all of the various developers and publishers, marketers, etc., from back in the day. And as the book was being kind of put together, some of them were asked, would you be up for doing, a video interview as part of an online ABug? Because obviously back at the point that the book was being made, we were very much in the COVID era. And yeah, a lot of these people said yes, they would be, willing to do that, which is very generous of them to offer. And Dave asked if, Dave and the people I design asked if I would, actually be the interviewer. So, by the way, it feels a bit funny being the other side of this today because I don't have experience of being interviewed like this. But yeah, that's how it came together, and that was fascinating. I mean, it was a real privilege, really a real privilege to be able to just chat to some of these legends. I mean, Peter Scott, just to say in particular, I mean, Peter Scott is Cards on the Table is my favorite Beeb game developer. I think he's incredible and he's so inventive and imaginative. The stuff that he managed to squeeze out of the Beeb, particularly things like SimCity, is just mind blowing to me. So having the chance to just talk to him about it and what that was like was amazing. And obviously, yeah, Gary Partis and Daryl Still from Audiogenic, and Jolyon Myers also joined us for that interview as well. Got to talk to Chris Payne and Mike Ellis, who were well. Chris was the marketing lead for both I think Micropower and then Superior. He came up with a lot of the marketing materials and ideas for those games, and then Mike Ellis did the artwork for the cover artwork, which that was such a big part of what those games were because the cover was what sold them, and it's also not just what sold them, it's what made the games come alive in your own head. Because I mean, these days games sell with a screenshot of what the game is. It's just the game boxes. Well, not that you really have boxes anymore. I suppose they're just thumbnails on Steam. But what you see is just a cutscene from the game. Whereas back then they were turning these very simple kind of pixel graphics into artwork that then lived in your head. So when you were playing the game, that's what you imagined you were watching and interacting with. So that was really, really, really interesting. And then Tony obviously is again another legend. He had so many interesting stories. I think my favorite was when he told me about how it was years after he'd long since left behind Acorn related games development, and he went for an interview at Reflection. And he said that the actual interview itself didn't go particularly well, and he was interviewed by a couple of very young guys who didn't really have much to say about his Tony's experience. But they said to him at the end of the interview that their CEO had asked if he could speak to Tony after the interview, and so he went off to speak to the CEO, and it turned out to be Martin Edmondson, who obviously developed Raven Skull amongst other things. And he knew Tony, but had never met him. He just knew him because of his reputation for things like Starport, Quest, and Camelot, and so on, and also the articles that Tony used to contribute to Electron User. And yeah, they had a great chat, and Martin offered him the job there and then. He's like, "Well, I know that you're good, so I want you to work here." And Tony ended up working on Driver, which is one of the best-selling games for the PlayStation, as far as I know. It's like
Wow.
got a huge reputation, and yeah, that was Tony. So that it was just amazing to think that Acorn connection got him not just a job, but a job working on such a high-profile game. Just fantastic.
Yeah. Um, so you've got such a wide variety of content on your channel. How do you pick what next to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I I have a bit of a problem when it comes to these videos because I have lots of ideas and not very much time. So I know everyone says they don't have enough time, but I mean, the reality is I'm not a full-time YouTuber, and I don't have any aspiration to be one, by the way. So this is a hobby for me, and I have a top secret spreadsheet, ho ho, which has a long, long list of things where I have a moment of thinking, oh yeah, that'd be good. That'd be good. I can make a video about that. And yeah, I gradually try and work my way through them, not in any particular order. And also other events, literally events, overtake things sometimes. So if I go to, say, something like one of the events that they run at the Cambridge Centre for Computing History, if I bring my camera along with me and I film some footage while I'm there, I want to then make that video quickly so that I can get it online pretty quickly after the event, because it's still obviously a live thing in the heads of the people that were there, and also for people who didn't manage to make it and might have been curious about what the event was like. I like to get it out there quickly. So those tend to sort of leapfrog over the rest of the ideas that I have in the backlog. And obviously, sometimes I'll go to an event, like if I go to an ABug and I sit down with somebody like Chris Bradburn, as happened at the ABug South event last year. He showed me a couple of things that he'd been working on, and I ended up making two videos based on one was a game and one was a demo that he'd worked on, and I thought both were amazing, and I wanted to make a video about them. So yeah, again, those kind of leapfrogged over the top of other ideas that I've got. I've even got entire series ideas, like I have series of videos that I'd like to make, and I haven't even started. Even like making the first video of said series. So yeah, the time aspect is a problem, particularly now that I do spend a bit more time on each video. I think I actually got videos out quicker when I wasn't spending so much time on them. But now that I do spend more time on them, they take that much longer to put together, and so that slows things down a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so no shortage of ideas. Which video has had the most views, and why do you think it was the most popular?
Yeah, so this one took me by complete surprise, a very pleasant surprise, don't get me wrong. But just to give you some context, so if I make a video these days, I think I'm lucky if it gets somewhere between 800 to 1,000 views. That's kind of that's a high watermark for me. Most of my videos don't get that many views. They probably get somewhere around 500. That's probably the average. This video, which was again, this is one of Chris Bradburn's things that he showed me at ABug South. It's a demo. This video got, I think last time I checked, something like 9,000 views,
Well,
and it got 7,000 of those views in the first 2 or 3 days of it going up.
Mm.
it was just amazing. Like I've never had that kind of experience with any video that I've made before. And it also got me quite a lot, quite a few more subscribers as well because people watched it and obviously then decided they wanted to subscribe. So I owe Chris quite a lot for that one because yeah, it's his demo. All I was doing was sharing my well again my enthusiasm for what he'd done, but also just demonstrating this incredible bit of programming where he basically created a 3D voxel landscape using an algorithm that somebody else had put together, I think in Python, and he just translated that into 6502
Mm.
assembler. And yeah, it's a fascinating demo. And if you run it on emulation as well, you can tweak it a bit to make it run a little bit faster. And it looks yeah, it looks great. And yeah, it got a lot of views. All I can assume is that the algorithm must have picked it up. Something about it must have ticked some boxes, or I don't know, gone down a neural pathway of that algorithm that YouTube has, and it got in front of a lot of people. And actually, I'm pleased it was a video like that because I feel like this was showing something that the Beeb could do. It was showing something that somebody who's actually doing this stuff right now was able to do with a BBC Micro. And I think that's a really cool thing to have got in front of a lot of eyes. So,
Absolutely, because this is the first time I had seen this running on on this video, so I was gobsmacked.
yeah,
So probably the same with many other people. First time they've seen this kind of thing running on the BBC Micro, so just fantastic.
yeah.
So any behind the scenes stories or surprises with from your channel?
Yeah, I'll give you a very recent surprise in a minute. But certainly in terms of behind the scenes, I noticed Brian is on the call today, which is great because he gets a big thank you from me for what went into this video. Um, if you haven't seen it, there's a video that I made it's about half an hour long, and it's about the golden BBC Micro that's in the London Science Museum. Now, this is something that I'd seen. I live in London. I've been to the Science Museum quite a lot, and I'd seen this machine there on several visits. And one day I thought, yeah, I wonder what exactly is the backstory for that, because it said on the plaque that it was a prize for a competition in the micro user. So I thought, oh well, I've got a large stack of micro users. So I thumbed through them and found the issue where yeah, this was the prize. And then I had to go through a few more magazines to get to the point where it actually announced the winner. And that was where it suddenly got a bit confusing because the person who was announced as the winner in the micro user was not the person who was on the plaque with this item as the competition winner. So what was originally accompanying the machine said, and it said it on the Science Museum's website as well, it said that this was a prize in a competition won by his first name was Ron, I think was the first name. Um, but in the micro user, it was somebody else, somebody called David.
Mm.
And I thought, well, this doesn't add up. So yeah, I was fortunate that I posted about this as I was making the video. I posted about it on Twitter, and Brian picked up on it and said that he would put me in touch with Tilly Blythe, who was the curator at the Science Museum that actually put together this collection in the first place. And I had a long conversation with her, and yeah, she said, yeah, to be honest, when the exhibition was put together, there was an assumption made that the person who donated the machine was the person who'd won the competition. It's a fairly
Oh,
natural assumption to make because it's such an unusual machine. But yeah, that's actually not what happened. The biggest regret I've got is I never actually managed to work out what happened to get it from the competition winner to the person who ended up donating it. I can only assume it got sold in a private ad or through a BBS or something. But yeah, I'm very pleased with that video, partly because it's the first kind of, I guess, documentary style video I've ever done. And also because, yeah, I actually managed to get a correction made to the Science Museum's collection. That's kind of cool.
yeah, fantastic.
Just on the surprise point, I don't know how many people here are subscribers to Linux format. I've only been a subscriber for about a year, but I literally was paging through. This is this month's edition, and they had this. This is mirrored, but they have this article in here about coding Space Invaders, and I couldn't believe it because as I was reading down the page, it actually references me. So the person who's written this article has actually been on my YouTube channel and found the series of videos that I made about this Cosmic Invaders game, which was a type-in listing from a BBC Micro type-in listing book. And they've ended up writing an article about it. And I had no idea. I mean, if I wasn't a subscriber to that magazine, I wouldn't even know that was in there. It was a pure surprise the other evening as I was reading it and saw my own name in the article. So that was quite cool. I mean, my channel's really not that big, right? I've got just under 2,000 subscribers. I'm not a big YouTube name, and as I said, I don't have any ambition to be. But yeah, that was a nice surprise to think that somebody had obviously watched one of those videos and decided they were going to write an article in a reasonably mainstream magazine.
Um, are there any particularly difficult or rare items that you're still on the lookout for that you'd like to feature in your channel?
Yeah, so this one is one that when I first read about it, I thought, wow, I wonder if there really is one of these because I mean there are photographs of it. So this is the Acorn Business Computer or the ABC. Um, to the best of my knowledge, there may even be people on this call who know better, but to the best of my knowledge, it was announced by Acorn in I think 1985, and then they cancelled it, so it never actually shipped. But I know that it then became the Cambridge Workstation, which obviously did sell, although not, I don't think it sold many, but I might be wrong there, but I don't think it was a big seller. So there aren't as many of those around. But I feel like there must somewhere be an ABC, even if it's just a prototype, because there are photos of it, obviously, in the promotional materials. So yeah, that's one that yeah, I don't know if anybody here has ever seen one in person or only ever seen them as photos. But yeah, I would love to make a video about that if I could ever find one. I don't think it would make for a great video without actually physically being able to show it. But yeah, ever since I found out about it, that one's kind of interested me.
Yeah, so if someone's listening to this video and knows the whereabouts of an ABC, uh, please get in touch, uh, and perhaps Colin can make a video from that. That would be great. I was going to ask you, have you noticed any trends or changes in the retro computing community since you first became involved?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I feel like it's grown quite a bit. I mean, for me, an interest in Acorn computing was something that I've always had kind of on the back burner. I mean, it's become a bigger thing for me over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. Um, but it feels like more people are getting into it than I felt like there were when I first sort of took an interest, which is great. I think some of it may even be down to people taking a sort of a re-interest in their old machines during lockdown potentially, and some of those people have continued with that interest since, which I think is great. Another positive trend are the number of new games that people are making for Acorn machines. I mean, for me personally, that is a huge thrill. Whenever one of these comes out, I think it's amazing, and they're such good games. People like Tricky, Zero X Code, obviously Chris Bradburn, I've already mentioned. Stephen Scott. They must invest a huge amount of time into putting these things together, and they also must know that it's not something that is going to be, a game that's played by thousands and thousands of people because the number of us who are into this is, it's a modest crowd, and I think it's incredible that they put this much time into making such good quality games. I mean, Electrobots, for example, on the left hand side there is amazing. I love Palace of Magic and Citadel type games, and when this one came out, it's so good, and I haven't completed it, but it's an amazing game. And likewise, if you've played any of Tricky's arcade conversions, they are stunning. I mean, they're so like perfect in their recreation of what the original cabinet games were like. And to think that he's able to get that to work on a BBC Micro without any special extra hardware, it doesn't require sideways RAM or, Raspberry Pi on a tube interface. They're running on the original hardware. I think that is fantastic. Um, I will say there's one trend that I'm a little worried about, which is that I've noticed that in sort of more mainstream reporting about computing history, I feel that the American story is starting to overshadow the kind of computing history that we had in the UK. I mean, I've seen articles written by the BBC themselves, which is slightly ironic, where they'll talk about computers or even consoles from the sort of 80s, and not even mention the BBC Micro or even the Spectrum, and
Mm,
only talk about things like the Nintendo Entertainment System or Commodore 64. And that concerns me a little bit because I feel like, well, it's a part of our computing history that's special, I guess, to the UK, and that's why I'm a huge supporter of places like the Centre for Computing History, National Museum of Computing, because they do a fantastic job of bringing this stuff to life and making sure that complete picture. I'm not trying to claim that the American story doesn't matter. Of course, that's extremely important, but it's not the full story. We had a whole era of computing in the 80s and early 90s that was specific to this country, and I think that's something that we should celebrate.
yeah, that's all of us that are listening to this. We can assist and help with that and keep the flame burning. Um, do you have any favorite hidden gems of Acorn software or an underrated game that should be highlighted or underlined?
I've picked a couple here. I've
Yeah.
got a few, but obviously I've already mentioned the new games. I mean, partly because they're new, not everybody is necessarily as familiar with them as some of the classics. So I always urge people to go to the BBC Micro Complete Games Archive website and look at the latest releases because you'll find some amazing stuff there. But in terms of games from the past, Cyborg Warriors deserves a lot more attention. So this is a Tony Oakton game. I think I'm right in saying it's the last game he wrote for Beeb Stroke Electron. And it's an amazing space shooter game if you like kind of scrolling, parallax scrolling shooting games. It's amazing. The graphics are fantastic. Plays really well. Never actually had a solo release because it was I think it came out in 91 or 92 and it was part of a Play It Again Sound compilation. That was the only release it had. And it only came out because, as Tony mentioned in his interview, he sent it to Superior. It got put in a drawer, and I can't remember which of the two Hansons it was, possibly Richard Hanson's, one of their kids found it in a drawer and played it and said, "This game is amazing." And so it ended up getting released on a Play It Again Sound compilation. But yeah, if you've never played it, it's brilliant. And yeah, I'm sorry. People who watch my videos know that I have a bit of an obsession with Save Your Bacon. I don't know why, because it's a very silly game, but I really like it. There's something about it. It's very eccentric. It's a pig collecting pork chops while being chased by a dog, and the only defense mechanism you've got is a cat that you can throw at the dog. It's bonkers. I don't know why a pig is collecting pork chops in the first place, but yeah, I love it. So if you've never played it, go and play it.
Let's see. Let's have a quick poll in the chat to see if we got any fellow lovers of this game, and hopefully we're not hearing crickets. Um, otherwise, you might be the only one,
I
Colin.
might be the only one, yeah.
It's looking like you are. Sorry.
Enough. Fair enough. Well, hidden
Yeah,
gem.
people are saying never heard of it. Okay, so
Forget.
what about the third one?
Oh no, so sorry.
Oh,
That's
they're
the
both
black
pigs.
screen and the in-game shot there for the
Yeah,
same. Yeah.
of course. Yeah, there's the pork chop. I can see it floating down. Yeah, super. In your opinion, why do Acorn computers still resonate so strongly with enthusiasts today?
Yeah, so I forget who it was that said this to me, and they may well have been quoting somebody else, or it might even have been a slogan. I don't know, but I've heard the BBC Micro in particular referred to as the Rolls-Royce of 8-bit home computers, and I think that it's quite a good analogy. First of all, because it was one of the most expensive, as we all know, but also because it had an awful lot of additional functionality, I guess, that other 8-bit micros didn't have because, if you take something like the Spectrum, it was very much positioned as a gaming machine and didn't have things like a tube interface, certainly nothing like Ethernet, never know how to pronounce that, and all the other kind of hardware extras, the fact that, the Beeb, you can connect it to a second co-processor, um, the fact that it's such a resilient machine as well. I mean, Beebs are, they're chunky machines and they've got great keyboards on them, as indeed does the Electron. So I think they've had a pretty good survival rate compared to some other machines of the era. So all of that combined, I think, is one reason why they definitely still resonate. And as I mentioned, obviously you can plug things like a Pi into them. The Raspberry Pi project itself is an offshoot, effectively, of the Computer Literacy Project. And the way that the Pi has taken off is incredible. And I feel like it owes a big debt to the Beeb or to Acorn in general.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then the other reason is that it may not be the case for everybody here, but certainly for somebody like me and for people maybe a couple of years older than me as well, the Beeb in particular was a computer that you probably had access to by virtue of it being in so many schools. So you might not have had one at home. It wasn't, the most common home micro, but yeah, there was probably one in your classroom. And I've spoken to people younger than me who remember seeing them at school long after, they were actually a contemporary machine, and they just had a shelf life, I think, that went on quite a bit longer, partly because of the educational software. And it's a bit of a cultural touchstone, I guess. People see them and they remember them. They might not be into retro computing, but they remember seeing BBC micros and possibly using them in a lesson at school. And it keeps it. Yeah, I think it kind of lends it an extra appeal that some of the other machines, as I say, probably don't have in quite the same way, particularly in this country.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that for me at least, that's why they continue to appeal.
Yeah, I think you've encapsulated that really, really well. If somebody was starting out with had just discovered Acorn retro computing, um, what advice would you give to them?
Uh, I'd say watch out. It starts with one and it very quickly becomes more than one, as I think I've probably demonstrated already. And I don't think there's anybody on this call for whom that's not true. I heard some of the conversation as I was joining. I think uh, the other Paul who's on the call was talking about how he's now expecting delivery of a BBC Micro. And, these things multiply. So watch out is probably my first bit of advice. And the other thing is, what appeals to me may well differ from what appeals to others. I'm very aware of the fact, for example, that in all I've talked about today, I haven't once mentioned the Archimedes, which is a big part of the Acorn computing scene and continues to be. And that's just because I never had one. For reasons I don't fully understand. We never had them at school either. We just went straight from BBC Micros to, I think, an RM Nimbus was the machine that came along after the Beeb, certainly at my school. And so, yeah, that's missing from my kind of collection. And for other people, that's actually much more important to them than the bead might be. So ultimately, it comes down to what you find interesting, and it doesn't have to stop at the things that you had back in the day either. As I've also demonstrated, I've taken an interest in Scions, never had those back in the day, but I think they're great, and it just shows you that these trips to computing history museums and retro events can be quite dangerous too. So watch out for those.
Where do you see the Acorn retro scene going in the future, or perhaps general retro computing going?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I keep mentioning the museums, but I do really think that they're an important part of like what the future holds. I don't know if he's on the call, but there's somebody in the ABug community called Elliot who's probably the youngest person I think in our collective user group. And his interest, as far as I know from talking to him, came from visiting, these museums and getting to interact with these machines, and it sparked an interest in him. I'm not going to say that that's going to happen for everybody that goes to museums like that, but I like to think that it will keep an interest in these machines going into the future after some of us have shuffled off the mortal coil, so to speak. The other thing that I think is really important is a kind of combination of emulation and also the archiving that people. I can see Phil on the call. I know Nigel Barnes is also very into getting hold of as many ROMs as possible to be able to dump them and preserve them. I think that is extremely important because, sad as it is to admit, I keep looking at my beads literally here. That's why I'm looking over. These machines won't last forever, right? They will
Mhm.
eventually give up the ghost, if for no other reason. I mean, the plastic that they're housed in is going to disintegrate eventually because that stuff doesn't last forever. And whilst 3D printers are great, obviously there's a limit to what you can do to keep these things going. So I think, far enough into the future, emulation is going to have to be the thing that preserves the kind of memory of these machines. I mean, did you know that you can emulate an EDSAC? I only found out about that recently. So those machines that took up like a whole room and ran on valves, like there's an emulator on the University of Warwick's website where you can go and literally simulate using an EDSAC with your own punch card. So yeah, for me, I think that's a big part of the future. And I guess I should probably wave the flag for YouTube a little bit, which is to say that even if you don't own these machines and you don't have the time or the interest to emulate them, you can always go and watch some idiot like me playing games really badly and giving his opinion about them. And maybe that floats your boat. So yeah, and thank you for all of you for whom that is true.
Colin, thank you so much. It's been a fantastic to get to know you through your stories and through your memories of Acorn computing.